Hello and welcome one and all to the Reset Show episode number 21. We're 21, who'd have thought it? The future of work. Today's special guest is the founder of WOW, which is World of Work at Henley Business School, where she leads on professional development, people and the future of work, Dr. Naeema Pasha. Now, look, there is so much that I could say about Naeema and her areas of interest and expertise, but that would probably take up the entire show with just the introduction. So for now, I'll just say welcome and a huge thank you, Naeema, from us all for joining us today. Huge thanks also to my co-hosts, Emma Bridger and Belinda Gannaway, our producer, Katie Austin, our live studio audience, and of course, you lovely people, our loyal listeners and viewers. Thank you so much for tuning in again. Over to Belinda for a quick recap about the Reset Show before we get chatting with Naeema.
So if you're new to the Reset Show, welcome. And it's great to have you here. The Reset Show is really the response to what we saw as a moment in time that sort of hit this time last year. It's a moment in time, hopefully between the pandemic and whatever comes next. And we wanted to seize the opportunity to revisit the world of work and look at the opportunity through multiple lenses. So we have a variety of different guests, all coming from different backgrounds, different trains of thought, to ask some powerful questions about what does the world look like and how does we make the world of work better in the future.
Cool, thanks, Bea. So welcome, Naeema. We're absolutely delighted you could join us, and we're really blown away you were able to make time for us. Big thank you, big shout out to our friend Perry Timms for the introduction. So thank you, Perry. He's a good friend of ours. But before we get stuck into the questions, is there anything that we haven't mentioned already that we really need to know about you?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for such an incredible introduction. I always think, oh no, I've got to live up to all this. So I'll do my best, but guarantee I won't. But the one thing I guess that I've done in addition since we originally started talking was I've also released another piece of research from Henley. It's quite a major piece of research that we've just done. It's called The Equity Effect. And we're looking at what happens when organisations start embedding equity, diversity, inclusion into their organisation and what kind of transformations that creates. So I think that's a really interesting piece of work. I'm delighted to talk about that as well.
Awesome, that sounds amazing, and absolutely on top of everyone's agenda at the moment, really. So, okay, so today we're going to focus pretty broadly because obviously you've got so many strings to your bow and you do some amazing research. We're going to focus quite broad to start with, though, on the future of work. And let's start by talking about COVID. I had a really interesting conversation with my husband, actually, who's a historian, last night, and he was kind of talking me through the way throughout history great plagues have always kind of been a catalyst for huge societal, political change, etc. And he went through loads of examples I won't go through today because I'm not a historian. This is you are all about exploring, predicting, hypothesizing on the future of work. So what do you think we're going to see happen as a result of this pandemic we're going through right now? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, strangely, we do have business historians in the business school who've been looking at the kind of analysis of what happened with different kind of plagues through history and what happens in terms of changing, and any kind of major influence on historical, that really is quite strong and influences a society quite deeply, such as, for example, the Industrial Revolutions changes society quite dramatically. So if I could just go through a little bit of history, is that one of the things that we have when we had the Industrial Revolution, first of all, when we had like the introduction of industrialization, the spinning jenny, mechanization, transport, all these kind of things came in, and that created cities differently because people had to flock to create urban centers in order to work. And then obviously get set up. So the kind of nature of society and the way we lived changed as that progressed through. And when we came into, I think around 1940, when Henry Ford started mass production, we're looking at different industrial revolution. workers got together and said, we can't keep working all the time. The unions came together and said, we need a weekend, and we need to stop working at a particular time. So that set down through the whole world a kind of a way of working, that we go into workplaces, we come away from workplaces, we stop at weekends from our workplaces and have this 2 days off. And what, if I bring it all the way back up into looking at the influence of COVID, one of the main influences, apart from the impact on health and livelihood, is the way that many people have had to change their work. And I say many and not most, because many more people have not had to. They're still in hospitals, transportation, agriculture, manufacturing. Many people, particularly in knowledge industries, have shifted to home working. And that has been a major influence, which you'll see every day in the newspaper about should we be now adopting this as a kind of new way of working, a hybrid way of working. And I think even this morning Morgan Stanley was saying, if you can eat out, you can work in the office. So there's lots of people getting quite angry about the different ways of approaching. So that's one of the things that COVID has done, is really kind of made us think differently of where work can be done.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so do you think that's going to have a long impact though? Because as you say, we're already starting to see, the Morgan Stanleys, the Goldman Sachs, etc., saying, come back, we want you back in the office. What do you think are going to be the kind of longer term effects of the way we've had to work differently during COVID?
We can go back to a study that was done in China before, even coronavirus appeared at all, several years ago, where a company wanted to look at the effect of what would happen with working at home. And it gave people the opportunity to either work at home or be in the office, but not as in you choose what you want, we'll pick you around. I think it was done by alphabetical order of names. So it wasn't necessarily people who had children or caring responsibilities. Anyway, they all had this opportunity to do that, and people went off and did that. And they were similar kind of experience that we have now, that I'm not having the commute to do. I've got more time with the family. I'm getting involved in my soda bread making or whatever it is that we want to do at the moment. But at the end of that time, the company offered people the opportunity to either stay working at home or return to the office. And about half of the people wanted to return to the office and about half didn't. So I think it's exactly the same that we're experiencing now, that for many people, going back into the office in the same way is not something that they want to do because of how we've constructed life over this last year. And for some people, it's really important to go back to the office because of the social glue that offices give, not necessarily the sitting at your desk doing Excel spreadsheets. That's not the place to go to work, but being able to work with other people, have a social connection with them because you can see their eyes directly, which actually has an effect on the way we connect with people. So I think so if you're in a senior leadership position, people will probably think, well, maybe we need to have people in the office so at least we can start innovating and creating. And then people saying, well, we've been doing that already this year. So we're in a complex way of being. So I think the questions are just going to still be tested, I think, for the next year at least.
Yeah. Really interesting, and we could carry on talking about this for the rest of the call. But I want to move on to another, really interesting kind of theme that comes up when we talk about the future of work, and that is artificial intelligence and automation of jobs. And this is something that you are, you talk about, you blog about, you research on. So give us your thoughts on this. How is AI and automation going to change the way we work in the future?
We're expecting, so there are many reports out, and we can't predict exactly any of these things. I like what you said at the moment. I'm predicting the world, the future of work, and I think, oh, if only I could. But I can give you what I think, which I'm sure we'll come back to and go, you were entirely wrong there. But what I can say is that some of the things we're expecting with the impact of AI and automation coming into workplaces, we will expect differences in the way that we work. And it's initially people were talking about, well, AI is going to come in and take over. You'll have robots taking over jobs, and robots are certainly coming in and taking over certain jobs. What we're actually seeing a lot more, if we think about it, is AI integrated into what we do. So it's taking away certain tasks in our jobs, and that's the main area that AI will continue. So I'm assuming everybody on the call or listening in will be have a smartphone. So the amount of AI technology in the smartphone, we're recording this on Zoom. There's AI technology here, and it'll go out on YouTube. So, you know, you've got search, things are going on search, people are recognizing what you look at. If you like particularly this kind of podcast that's going out, and then it will send you more of this, and we'll probably get into that stream. So we're already in this whole kind of thread of AI already. So when we talk about the future work, sometimes we have to think, well, actually it's already here, it's already integrated. We really need to start asking some questions around what data is taken from us. I know this is talked about quite a lot, but if we think about the amount of apps that are in our phone, and it's not just the data that app is taking, it's the data that app is taking off other apps as well. So the integration of the apps and knowing that, you know, what's going on. I think that's the key thing. We have to know that the kind of AI that's coming in is going to sort of enhance that. And I could give you a few kind of key areas that I think is going to particularly impact, but I can pause for a second before I go.
That's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's like there's the kind of the apocalyptic types, which might talk about my husband already. He's one of those. He's like, all like, yeah, doom and gloom, and he's probably in the camp of like, you know, robots are going to take all our jobs, and you know, kind of Terminator future view of the future, versus those people like me who are thinking it's going to make life easier and better, and they're going to do all the rubbish stuff for me and leave me with all the cool stuff to do. And it's interesting, you know, there's kind of different schools of thoughts. But in terms of what this future of work where there is more automation, as you say, we're already seeing that. You know, how many go through the self scans at, you know, Sainsbury's now, for example, or I don't go, so it's like a little hands up, I'm a little girl. But in terms of what that means for, I guess, workforce planning, for skills, for learning and development, you know, that's a whole, I mean, again, we could do a whole call on this, but, you know, just some kind of first thoughts from you on that in terms of what that means from a people planning point of view and a skills planning point of view.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of my main area of work actually. It's about understanding what changes impact are coming in. AI is one of them, but as I said, as I mentioned, there's things like diversity, and Perry, who you mentioned right at the top, talked to him, and I think there's what we've got now for workers, workplaces, and you know, leaders start thinking about where we're going is to understand we've got COVID, we've got AI. And we've got also social movements that are creating a difference in our thinking, and also balance out perhaps some of the polarized thinking that we have as well. So those things are coming in. So when we start thinking about planning, I think we have to take an integral approach to all those areas. And if I give a specific area that we could perhaps think about a little bit more, I mean, there's different types of AI that's coming in. There's 5G is coming in. There's something called robot process automation, which is the one that people think about most often when we think about taking jobs, because it's the one that's taking away routine areas. But if I mention augmented and virtual reality, AR and VR, so one of the things that's coming into the workplace already is looking at, instead of this Zoom call that we're on at the moment, which is great. I mean, we wouldn't have done this, been able to keep our work up through a pandemic if the pandemic had happened, you know, 10 years ago or something. We'd have found another way, but this wouldn't have been the way. But we still feel at the end of a Zoom sesh quite tired. We haven't communicated that well, you know, because we can't, you know, we're perhaps not the same as an office. But so if we want to use technology still, and perhaps thinking actually it's quite good, even if we're not in the office, we know that our offices are global. Actually, this kind of technology might be quite good, or for people who can't get in, or various things. So AR and VR technology, where you put on a headset and connect with people, might be something, probably will be something that we will start adopting. So Facebook, for example, has put a lot of investment into something called Oculus. It's at the moment quite gaming, but actually it's got an adaptation to it for work meetings with an app you can download. You can meet people, and it still feels a little bit weird, but it feels much more connected because you're in a workplace and you're talking a bit more physically, and there's a bit more movement around things. So if we think this is starting to come in to workplaces, when we start thinking about how we do our team building, how we do our connection, how we start constructing the skills that we will need for that, then we have to do some kind of adaptation to think this kind of technology may make us change the way we do things. And I mentioned what we want to do in terms of equity. So one of the things, I will just bring a thread from that at the moment, is that we found that when we look specifically at race equity in our report, but other groups came through that as well, is that actually a lot of people from minority groups, or people who are often discriminated against, have found online working better. Literally on a level playing field. Everyone's like a bunch of tiles in front of you. So it could be that we also look at ways of connecting and using these ways because it's more open and free and transparent. Free as in open, free, not as in free at cost. So it could be that we need to adopt technology as well, because we have to think how we start confronting inequity and, for example, racism, which we looked at particularly in organisations.
Sure. Oh, it's so interesting. We spoke to a firm who are specialists in this area quite a while ago, Contacts of Bees, and we had a really interesting discussion with them about how we might start to use these sorts of technologies. It just blows my mind, to be honest with you. And I watch your Homemade Perfect, where they put on the VR and their house completely reimagined. I think the possibilities are so exciting, aren't they? And we did touch on whether we'll be able in the future to use something like VR to increase empathy. So if you're thinking about I'm not a gamer, but my kids are gamers. What's the role playing games when you put on a different role? And we're talking about, it's a big ethics question here, but is it possible to take a different role on at work for a VR headset and actually understand how it feels to be not the person that you are today? So there's kind of a whole big conversation about that, which is interesting at the very least. But yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see where these technologies go. Just before I pass it over to everyone else to ask questions, I'm sure everyone's got loads. I can see B writing furiously. She's got loads of questions. I know something else that you talk about is things like generational differences. And this is like really hot topic. And I go back to my background as a psychologist, and I get a little bit like, where's the empirical evidence that there is a generation X and Z and everything? And I was pointed to some work by someone called Emma Perry, actually talking from someone I talked to yesterday about her work. I think she's Cranfield, about the generational differences. That yes, of course there are generational differences, but it's not as neat as if you're born in 1979, your Facebook. If you're born in 1980, your Instagram. Love to hear your take on this and how we can use this the science in a way that's helpful rather than hinders us and puts people in boxes where it's not really that helpful. So what's your take on the whole generational differences piece?
I'm delighted to talk about that, and I've got a psychology background as well, so I completely agree. We've got this sort of evolutionary psychology part of it that part of us always goes back to this, our fears that come from our kind of early life as influences as children. So all those things are part of who we are. And that hasn't changed over millennia, in terms of human being genetically. We haven't, that hasn't adapted. But what we know, if we adapt to what we know about generational differences, is that major influences that happen will influence a group of people who experience them similarly. Not entirely, we're all individuals. So when we look at the difference between Generation X, millennials, and now Generation Z, which is the ones that are coming into the workplace at the moment, and the boomer generation, we do see differences in perhaps values and ethics. So we can bring back again, for example, to diversity and equity and so on, is that we find, and again we found that in our research as well, is that so I'm going to say this, I'm laughing because I know what I'm going to say. So we found older white men, this is awful because we put it in blocks, of the people we looked at, people who are older who are white, and a larger portion of those, that's not everybody in that group, but a larger portion of those group didn't see problems with diversity in organizations. What we found with younger groups from different ethnicities, they found that more easy. And that could be what we've seen and experienced of this generation is immigration, they're going to school with people from different backgrounds and cultures, seeing different things on TV, seeing different kind of people from all kind of influences in the government as well that we see now. So it could be that the experience of younger generation, which is why you get generational differences, approach things differently. And again, when you asked me about AI, being comfortable with using digital technology such as social media, where people have got more used to it in different younger generations, is something else that that's a feature, but it's not quite as neat. Is that what we found with millennials who are more comfortable with using social media and quite quick to use? We found with Generation Z, they're a little bit more concerned about the privacy around and who sees what, and also their digital brand, about if they're, rather than just posting anything, it's about how they look, what they do, how they come across on digital media as well. So there's different aspects of it. And one of the things, just to give you a stat at the thing that we were looking at also, is that when we're looking at organizations perhaps being, and I'm really interested in CEO activism because of the all the things that are going on. So what happens if a CEO is more, and we talked to about the Brewdog story and so on. So what happens when an organization actively is more activist, particularly at the CEO level? And when we looked at, and there's a report out looking at buying decisions, and what we found is there's an increase in younger generations more likely to buy a product if they see higher levels of CEO activism. Our own research in Henley, we also found that younger generations, particularly Generation Z, want an organisation that has social impact. So about half of us, when we looked at everybody, all generations want an organisation with social impact, about 48%, just under half, and that rises to 66% with Generation Z wanting an organisation to have social impact. So we see, so what we're not saying is that we're genetically different at different generations, but we see influences around us that can influence a group of people through generational differences.
Absolutely. Yeah, the conversation I had yesterday was, of course there's going to be generational differences, because we are to some extent, reflecting and a product of what happens around us and our experiences. But I think what we were talking about was it's much subtler and more, it's not as neat as putting people in boxes, and it's sort of, a lot of the behaviour characteristics that you might get in one generation, you'll get in others, but maybe to a lesser extent. So yeah, it's really interesting.
I agree.
Cool. Alrighty, I'm going to stop hogging the questions now, because I can see B furiously scribbling, and I just know she'll be desperate to ask some questions. So I'm gonna hand the questioning baton over to B.
Thank you. I've got two questions, and they're very different, but I'm going to link them both back to the Gen Z sort of train of thought. So my first one is about, we talked about AI and about how it can change the nature of work, because of some of the more mundane routine tasks can get done by robots, equivalents, or whatever, which frees up people to focus on more human tasks. So that's kind of one of the impacts on work, across many. But there's also, I think, I'm really interested in the impact of AI to create better experiences in and around work. So I'm thinking about, I guess, the HR use of AI to personalize people's experience of work, or to simplify people's experience of work. So I'd love to know your thoughts on that, particularly, I guess, around this idea of Gen Z being much more aware and concerned about their use of private data, personal data. So how are and will HR and similar teams use AI to create better experiences at work, and what are the risks in that around people's perception of how their data is being used?
So the area that I know most about is recruitment, because of working in a university in business school. So organisations using AI recruitment tools. So initial AI recruitment tools, and they have changed a lot now. We know that the data was, well, have they changed a lot? It's like, we know they've changed a lot. I'm still kind of like, I think data is a complex area. So for any AI tool to work well, at the moment, it needs quite high level, quite a lot of data. It needs a huge amount of data for it to be trained in order to function well. And just to give you some ideas on some of the ways it works, is that some of the tools that are used in AI in recruitment, and not just recruitment. They may even thinking about bringing it onto the experience of Zoom is something called emotional AI. So lots of firms are using that in terms of personality tool testing on whether you're, looking at your face and saying that you could, and mapping that to big five personality on, through your facial expressions and so on. So, I mean, the data that they've done, in order to gather that data, they've had to, thousands and thousands, if not millions of data sets have gone to create this. Where they've come from is the critical thing. Have they come from a particular type, a particular group? Have they come from just senior managers, for example? And if they are just senior managers, you've probably got a bit of a type of people that are part of that. So I think there is a lot of call about how we go, there's lots of work and research on how we can take smaller data, but at the moment it's still working on high data sets, and where that data can come from, I think a lot of it is still dubious. I think so. I was on a call recently, so one of the things that if you've got a phone like an iPhone that opens your phone using your face, so facial recognition software is originally used for terrorist tracking for an organization till Apple bought it up. So it's gathering lots of data, randomly looking at people and then looking at tracking the data accordingly. I'm pro AI, by the way. I sound like I'm not, but I'm very pro AI, and I think it really does glue. But I think we're now in this space that we've got to really look at regulation and how we put it in. So we put it into the HR space to look at, is this really tracking personality that well? Do you want to look at, even if it is big five personality the tool that you want to use? What kind of skills are you looking in your organization? Are you using the same skill sets that you've used for since the organization has started? What happens if you start thinking about what you don't have, because you've been looking at what's in the room and thinking that's the right skill set that we have? What if you started using a different way of recruiting? And I think I did learning coding myself. Not please don't ask me to do anything on those lines. But I started looking at things, and I was thinking what we could do is that putting a bit of power back into the employee or the job searcher is to produce apps to think how much an organization has used their the app starts looking at organizations looking at ethical AI use, looking at their D&I work, and then it's like a reverse glass door. It's like a glass door, but on these kind of things in the sense. So I created this little thing, not that it's gone anywhere, but it's just an idea, I thought, of actually people will start making decisions on different things. And I just talked about the Generation Z, about people wanting more and more people, Generation Z in particular, wanting the organization to make a positive impact on society. However, what I feel from that, and it's similar to climate change and sustainability, it could have been driven by a particular generation, but it pervades the whole organization. We all now thinking more about sustainability, positive impact. So I think AI development is probably going to go into the HR space as well, about positive impact and social impact in organizations.
So interesting. I'll check in my second question, which was something I heard you talking about this morning. I was listening to another podcast, and you were talking about flexibility and the 4-day week. But something that that was a dot that I hadn't connected when I've thought about this area before, was the impact on a 4-day week on carbon emissions. Yeah. So really just going back to Gen Z, social impact, and also desire for flexibility, and the business case around the 4-day week may be having an extra element around actually reducing carbon emissions, and that becoming attractive to people, as well as the flexibility piece. I just thought that was fascinating. It's not a connection that I'd heard before.
It was a great piece of research looking at the 4-day week, because what we found in that piece of work, and it's been replicated in other pieces of work as well, is that productivity increased for those organisations that adopted 4-day week. The worries that people have, well, our customers won't be around, so how can you be off? So that they found a way through that, by perhaps balancing that week out, is that people felt less stressed because they were off for the 3 days rather than the 2 days, and that helped them refresh. And there was no, as I say, productivity was still high. But as you say, there were additional things that in addition to the well-being, was structure about, you know, not being on that commute for that day. There was, you know, the reduction in carbon emissions, which we also was talked a lot about through the experience of lockdown as well, that we had the reduction in carbon emissions. So that is something to look at in terms of sustainability. It's only one aspect, because I also read that a lot of plastic use increased during COVID, and obviously the masks and so on. You know, so we've got to, you know, there's the, you know, because people were packaging, you know, the food package was packaged a lot more rather than perhaps we didn't want to, because our concerns over health had changed through. So we've got to, it's a complicated piece that we need to put together on all aspects of sustainability. But certainly one of the things around the 4-day week was about the, you know, the reduced commute. You know, an impact on sustainability and positive impact on society.
Thank you. Yeah, as I say, it's not a connection that sort of jumped out at me before, so I thought that was interesting, as you say, one part of the puzzle. Justin, I'm going to ping over to you, because I know that I can see the chat lighting up, and I know that you have a good grasp of what's going on and what questions we need to ask.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. So Debbie has made a comment in the chat, which I'll come to in a moment, actually, if that's all right, Debbie and Naeema, because it's quite a big question. Naeema, so much that I could pick up with you, and I'm kind of whittling down my notes. Well, I'll talk about that. No, I won't. I'm interested in this. We were talking earlier about, you were just talking there about a little bit the phenomenon of shiny keys that we mentioned, you know, firms getting wowed by tech. And so yes, you've got this, you know, facial scanning mapping onto the big five and in recruitment and everything. What are your thoughts about where AI will actually do a better job than humans in terms of weeding out biases in our decision making? And that might be obviously to do with race or gender, but it could just be also to do with this myriad of psychological biases that we carry around all the time. I want to just a quick anecdote. I was listening to a podcast the other day about someone who is an expert in financial markets, and he was quoting a really interesting piece of research which looked at investors in a particular domain, and they found over a period of a number of years that the most effective investors were those who were either dead or had forgotten they had an investment account. So all of the people who were so-called experts had performed worse than the people who had basically done absolutely nothing. And I was thinking, so that's a lovely example of actually where humans get in the way. And he was making the point that that's because we have these cognitive biases which influence our decision making and our attitude to risk. So they were getting in the way of our ability. And I'm wondering, to link back to my original question, where you think AI can be used to actually replace some of those processes that our biases do get in the way?
That's a fascinating question, Justin. And you'll know that Daniel Kahneman's book is out now, is looking at noise as how that comes into, you know, background noise on investment decisions and so on, you know, coming in and interfering with that on medical decisions, legal decisions, and so on. So they're quite serious aspects around where AI could make more clearer decisions. And the thing I wrote last summer is that when AI was used for cancer scanning, it performed higher than radiologists, for example, because it was using so what AI is very good at is pattern recognition. And to call it intelligence is probably a difficult one, but again, it needs masses of stuff, data fed into it so it recognizes the difference between a cancer cell and a croissant or something, you know, that so it really works on that. So once that's right, it can work much better. What it didn't do is work better than two doctors put together, because there's something around the intelligence of humans that understand nuance and where things don't, you know, where you've got additional things. So it works really well. As you can imagine, it's a machine, so it worked really well on the routine things that are critical. It also needs the right data. I know I keep talking about data, but the right data will need to be fed in right at the start. So if we again go back to recruitment, if you're setting up your recruitment system, you're going to use AI for your document scanning using computer vision or something, and it writes the, gets the stuff in, it reads the application, it sends the email off, it organizes the callback for interview, it sends, everybody gets a letter because, your department isn't held back, which is, so your candidates are kept better. But if you've set up your skilling, again, if you look at your CVs and it's scanned through and you're looking at similar, you're looking for words like leadership, and you're looking for words like, things like that. So you're thinking, well, these are the critical things that you are, but maybe if you've read the application, you'd probably see was that scanning hadn't worked quite the same, and even words like leadership or leader or boss or something hadn't been picked up if you've asked it to look for different nuances. If you were to read more detail and think, actually, this person, and I go back to graduate recruitment, an area that I'm most familiar with, is that if you look at somebody who hadn't been president of the rugby club and shown leadership, but what they've been doing is working in their family business, running their entire store, but because it hadn't come in through a leadership-y kind of thing and it's family business and whatever, that it hadn't been picked up, then you may be missing out on good talent again. So it's using the AI with the human inference to get the data right at the beginning. It can produce better because it's a machine, so it's not going to be biased, as it were. It's using machine learning, so you will get candidates if you started thinking differently from race. Social mobility is really important, and what we're looking at universities. So we can get the AI to work more positively in that way. That will be good. However, the other side of it is that they'll all join the organisation. And you may have a diverse intake, say from a graduate recruitment intake, that are different. Is your organisation then set up in how people and teams and organisations are supporting them all the way through? And then we can start looking at leadership. And that you may have a diverse intake, but what happens to those people? Do they feel they can be themselves in the workplace? So AI won't help with that bit. It's
Well, this falls into the category of, we could do a whole show on this, couldn't we? the fallibility of human decision making, I suppose, and where AI, given the right, as you say, the right data, where AI could help with that, I suppose. Thank you. I want to jump back to two things. So first of all, to give you the opportunity to talk about your latest project, because I know that's the thing you're most excited about. So maybe you can do two things at once, Naeema, because I know you're good like that. Maybe you could dip back into Debbie's question, which is building on a question you had earlier, and then feed into your latest research. You might be able to find a jazzy, snazzy link. And if not, just do a clunky one. That's fine. So the question from Debbie is coming back to this question about what are your best guesses at how the coronavirus pandemic may have influenced work. So when we look ahead in 20 years, so one of the things we will see is there was this exploration of, as you said, where work can happen. So that's an evolving situation. Anything else on your radar that you can anticipate being a feature of work, in the future that may have had its roots in the current pandemic situation?
Yeah, I think so. I didn't think I'd say yes to that one, because I thought, oh, have I? But then I think I possibly have, is that I've done some work, not this project, but this kind of links into it, is about what do we need to have in terms of skills and how we need to start approaching where we want to go as an organization. And I think I've called it meta skilling, a little model that I produced, but it's really looking at the digital and AI skills, but not just thinking, oh, we need to have digital and AI skills, but it's just, as I've been talking to you, Justin, thinking about the critical thinking around how you'd apply AI. And you talked about the infallibility of human thinking, and I think brilliant. I'm so glad we've got infallibility, and how we start embracing those differences, and how, I think it's good. It's good. It's those things that embrace us being human. In fact, my next stage is about those human qualities, about empathy, compassion, all the things that we hear about being quite important. And my research really strong on particular areas around looking at what we need for future work. It's about not just the empathy and people skills, but it's also analytical skills. It's developing those kind of critical thinking and being able to analyze well, and also sort of plan and work towards those. So anyway, I've got a bunch of skills on that. And my final piece, and we've touched on this already, about positive impact, is moving into this sort of activism space, because this last year, through coronavirus impact of working at home, balancing different things, watching the TV and looking at the inequalities that we're seeing in society, and how some people, you know, haven't had this hadn't had the opportunity to work from home, still had to look after kids, still had to go out places, you know, it's been quite different. So and then we're also looking at climate impact on climate as well coming in as well. So there's this whole section where organizations and CEOs are perhaps thinking of not just we're here to deliver our work to our workers. There's a lot of talk about stakeholder capitalism, but really thinking about what is an organization's role in addition to delivering their product services and you know, in making sure their staff are okay, but what is their responsibility to society as well. And then you look at sustainability, then you look at their contribution to diversity and a whole set of things, inequality, and really seeing organizations doing that a lot more, or at least, as we had a conversation earlier, organizations feeling that they need to say they're doing that because they know that's what people are doing. But how we translate into saying and then doing, I think, is probably one of the critical things that we'll see in 2022 particularly.
That is a lovely hopeful note, I think, to wrap that up on. Yeah, and so broadly speaking, we've touched on this on the show before, this emergence of, I suppose, corporate responsibility, I suppose, and how it's hopefully moving from being a box ticking exercise into actually becoming part of the DNA of what businesses do. We've got a long way to go. And there are, of course, a certain number of businesses which are already making that part and parcel of what their offer is. So yes, we do this, but actually we do this in order to be able to do this alongside that. So thank you. We're almost at time, but I can tell, Belinda and Emma, what would you like to wrap up with before I tie up the show?
Before I answer that question, there's one piece of stat I need to get out, which I meant to get out right at the beginning and all the way through. It's essentially the report I've just done, the equity effect, the research, and what we found, and this is really important for us, and it links to exactly what you said about how we move forward. We found that businesses that actively confront inequity and racism with practical measures record an average revenue increase of 58% to those that didn't. It's a huge difference. But it's not an unusual report when we look at other kind of literature in this area. And it makes sense if you start people feeling a sense of belonging, bring themselves to work, all the stuff that we will talk about, it really impacts the bottom line. What I wanted to say from this is that what we need to do is to have much more of a business argument. I know this is people saying it's not the right thing to do, it demeans it, but my position is going to be have a business argument on it, because that's how we can start making results happen.
Yeah, and that's kind of been the evolution of diversity, hasn't it? The diversity argument has gone from being a moral or an ethical one to a business argument as well. And lo and behold, businesses are perhaps starting to pay attention because, well, that's what they're there to do. Thank you, Naeema, and I hope you managed to talk to us enough about the latest project on today's show. Emma, you unmuted.
Yeah, just want to say massive thank you, Naeema. It was just amazing. And yeah, that last point, I'm so with you. I mean, what I do in my day job is to help people thrive and be their best selves at work. But if I go into corporates and such, and they look at me like I'm mad, so I have to go with the business case and say, but if you do this is the stuff I can help you to get, like increased profitability, etc., etc. So I'm completely with you. By any means necessary, any Trojan horse we can use to make these changes, let's use them. If we want to know more about this latest piece of research, where can we find out more about it? It's
on the Henley Business School website, and if you just have a look on there, it's you'll find out. It's called the Equity, and if you just Google the Equity Effect Henley Business School, you'll find it.
Awesome.
And I know that Katie will, of course, provide a link to that. She's nodding in the follow-up materials as well, Naeema. So that saves anyone even having to Google. Belinda, would you like to say anything before we bid our guest farewell?
I'm resisting the temptation to sneak in another question because I know we're out of time. Just to say that the Equity Effect report is absolutely fascinating, and it's got some killer quotes that are really, well, it's got killer content, but some real points in there that really make you stop and think. So I think there's lots in there from a business perspective, an organizational perspective, but also from a sort of an individual, what we all need to think about and how we all need to sort of make this something that we explore. So thank you for sharing that. As I said, we will make sure that link goes into the follow-up. But yeah, so thank you again. I think my last point would be, can you come back again, please? Because there's so
good. Thank you so much. You've been amazing. Thank you.
Naeema, thank you again from us all, and thank you to our studio audience. If you are interested, we will be back again in 2 weeks' time on Wednesday, the 30th of June. If you're interested in joining the live recording, we have Dr. Dai Hook, and we will be talking on neurodivergent teams and neurodiversity in the workplace. It's easy for me to say. So thank you one and all. As always, a quick plug: like and subscribe and share. That helps, to Naeema's point earlier, that helps drop our offering into the path of those who may be interested. Thank you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Enjoy the sunshine, if indeed it is still shining by the time you watch or listen to this. Thanks for now.